HR matters can be daunting. Boniwe Dunster joined us on Power Breakfast to unpack some of the questions and speak to some of the experiences that people may face regarding human resources in the workplace.
As people, we need to be curious, and it is the curiosity that makes us informed on what our rights are. As a starting point, you get employed into an organization, you have an employment contract. Question is, do you read your employment contract or do you just sign and look at the benefits? That's number one. Number two, then you attend your onboarding, and then in your onboarding session, they'll tell you about a number of things, and it could be information overload. But then you also have an opportunity of going back to reflect, and then going on the intranet or going on the employee staff handbook, depending what your company calls it. And then you start reading what are my rights, right? And then you also have your Labor Relations Act, your Basic Conditions of Employment Act. Those are the things that people often don't read or socialize with until they're in trouble. So for me, it's you need to understand the lay of the land, the environment that you work in, and read what is the company policies and procedures are saying, right? If I'm aggrieved, where do I go to? Who do I go to? Who do I my first point of call? So that is very important. Often people don't, right? But other than what a company says in terms of policies and procedures, the Labor Relations Act just generally covers everybody, irrespective of, because we do have small, medium companies that don't have HR in place and that doesn't have a lot of policies. But in the absence of policies, legislation still stands, because no policy is above legislation and the law. So I think your first starting point is also going and saying, what is legislation saying about being in an employment relationship? And then you start understanding, start observing and asking questions. The curiosity is what will actually get you there. It is important for you to have a record, especially if you are building on a case. Because for you to win a case, it's not built on, or it's not won on hearsay evidence. You need proper evidence, and that's why we often say to people, keep things in writing. If it's a grievance, there's a grievance form, put in a grievance form. If there's no form, put it on email. If you have had a conversation and no one follows up that conversation with an email or HR or your line manager, you have the right to then go on your email and say, as per our conversation, these are the notes that I have taken, or the minutes that I've taken on my end, and if there's anything that I've omitted, please add. They don't have to come back, right? They don't have to do anything, because maybe they're thinking they don't want to commit themselves. However, that is proof enough. So document and diarize a lot of things that you are doing, because that is gonna help you in future should you have a case that you need to defend or a case that you need to lodge against someone. In instances where there is a conflict or differing views on an issue, ideally looking at the legislation and at the company policies, at a point one could be wrong and one could be right, and in certain instances you as the employee could be on the wrong, right? But by virtue of that, you would go like, but HR does not really support us. They are taking the side of the business. However, I do not take away from people that have had bad experience with HR, because we have seen that, and in that case, if you feel at any point in time that you're not treated fairly, you actually still can use the same company policies to actually escalate the behavior of HR, because we may talk as HR as a department, but you might also be treated unfairly by one HR business partner, that's Boniwe, and Boniwe has a manager that she reports to. So you can go to Boniwe's manager and say, I'm aggrieved by Boniwe's conduct in terms of having to resolve my issue. There was lack of confidentiality, there was lack of fairness, and they didn't follow these procedures in helping me. And therefore, I'd like action to be taken against Boniwe through a grievance process, right? And if you're not satisfied, then you can escalate it to Boniwe super senior. And if all fails internally, because we do have companies that do not have matured cultures of dealing with this, then in that instance, then a person can actually take the matter to the CCMA for recourse, right? People often make a mistake of assuming that the CCMA is only for dismissed people. No, even if you're still fully employed and you're still there, you can still go to the CCMA. So you go to the CCMA and actually lodge an unfair labor practice dispute. You complete a form. It's a 711 form. They call it 711 oftentimes. But you also need to demonstrate that you have tried to resolve it or to escalate the matter internally and said, I have not been treated fairly. This is what happened. Boniwe treated me like this. My information was exposed. They sided with the business without following the right procedure. I've actually lodged a grievance with Boniwe's manager and Boniwe's super senior, and nothing was done. And this is the evidence that shows that I have completed the grievance forms, or alternatively, I have then sent emails, because you need to have evidence to say I have exhausted the internal process and it's not yielding anything favorable. Therefore, you're seeking recourse at the CCMA. But if your organization probably falls within a certain bargaining unit or certain bargaining council, then you can take it to the bargaining council, because it serves the same purpose with the CCMA. It's just that bargaining councils are industry specific, and then the commissioners will actually then listen to your matter and they can make a ruling of that. Oftentimes people are suspended because there is a pending investigation, or there's an investigation that needs to be done, and that investigation cannot happen in your presence within the organization, because you could tamper with the investigation. You could tamper with the potential then weaknesses, and this is what we often refer to as precautionary suspension. The reason that you are suspending someone from their work is because it's a precautionary measure, either to the operations or to the investigation itself. And when you're being suspended, your boss or whoever, maybe in support of HR, they will then issue you with a suspension letter. Previously, you then would be given an opportunity or a right to respond to the suspension, to say, can I, why shouldn't I be suspended? You would actually then be given reasons, but that is not applicable anymore, because there was a recent case that said that you don't have, like, the employer doesn't really have to ask, or you don't have to respond to that, so they can just give you a suspension letter, and that needs to be signed, and they need to be given content of why, the reasons why you are being suspended for. Many times you don't have a duration, but it should be within reasonable time, so that the investigation can conclude and the matter can be dealt with through a disciplinary hearing or not. It is important for people to know that while you are on suspension, you still need to be paid. You are still an employee. We often hear people say, I'm on unpaid suspension. You can't be on unpaid suspension. You are still an employee. You still need to get your salary, your benefits, and all your other benefits, like your risk benefits, medical aid. They still needs to be paid. The only time that your suspension cannot be paid, it's after the investigation has concluded, and maybe you have been taken through a disciplinary hearing, and then you could be then given probably a final written warning and unpaid suspension, instead of you being dismissed. So that could be an alternative to a dismissal, to say, we could have dismissed you, but we have given you a final written warning and probably an unpaid suspension. So it can only be effective then short of dismissal. Companies also need to caution against suspending people for minor things, right? A precautionary suspension comes if it is a major incident, it is a major risk to the organization. Like somebody said earlier, maybe a trust relationship could have been broken, or potentially the trust relationship is reaching its end, it's negligence, it's fraud, it's misrepresentation. All of those, then they can lead into a suspension. You don't suspend someone because probably they made an error in something, or they arrived late, or it's an honest mistake, which can also be dealt with through either a performance or a disciplinary matter. But you just don't suspend for minor things. You need to suspend for major things that could potentially lead into a dismissal, or things that could have actually bring a company's reputation, a company's image into disrepute. So start where you are. You might have been experiencing this toxicity for the last 2 years, but now you can even start now, in terms of having to lodge grievance, but also find someone internally that you can actually confide in regarding your matter as part of building up to this case. Employee wellness is important. Confiding in someone that is important. Reporting those to HR in writing is important. Informing your line manager of the challenges that you have in writing is also important. For other companies that are unionized, then people that belong to a union, they can also make contact with their union representative regarding what is happening, and they can be in a position to actually help them in terms of building up a case.
I hope this conversation has been enlightening and informative. Thank you to Boniwe Dunster for sharing her expertise on all matters relating to HR. Remember to like and subscribe for more great content.